Welcome to the Fractured Families podcast. I'm Charity, your dedicated parental alienation coach, here to guide and support families as they navigate the challenges of high conflict divorces and custody battles. On this podcast, we'll share insights, practical strategies, and hope for those on the journey toward healing and justice. Whether you're personally experiencing these challenges or just want to learn more about the complexities of parental alienation and custody disputes, you're in the right place. You are not alone. This is the Fractured Families podcast, where every voice matters and every story is heard. And if you find my conversation helpful, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. Your support helps us reach more families who need it. Hi, thanks for joining the Fractured Families podcast. I'm Charity, your host. I have with me today Sean McClintock, who is with us from Arizona. Today is his daughter's birthday. So, Sean, thank you for joining us today. I know it's going to be a tough interview. Sean has been alienated from his daughter. He has not seen her for a year and a half. He's going to walk us through his experience, his court custody, and his separation from his daughter. So, Sean, again, thanks for joining. Why don't you go ahead and get us started? Let's try to get a foundation of your relationship, what that was like, your relationship with your daughter, and then we'll go through the rest.
We met originally in 2014. We didn't really start dating until 2015. You know, honestly, my first impression was that this person was how I would describe it, like as ice queen. I was almost afraid of her when I first met her. And it's interesting that, you know, our first instincts are often spot on. And then she kind of pursued me actually through some mutual friends, and we started dating. And, you know, it was very sort of new into the relationship where suddenly she needed a place to stay, and you know, it was like, can I move in with you kind of thing. And I was very reticent at first, and so it was a very fast and furious type situation, you know, as we know, with certain personality types, which we're familiar with. And then it went very quickly from like let's start a family, you know, let's get pregnant, that kind of thing. I was very resistant initially, but I had come out of a relationship prior where we lost a child, and so I was having the pangs of parenthood, and I was very vulnerable at that time. So we decided to get pregnant, and my daughter was born in 2016. Today's her birthday. She'll be 9 today, and we were in Los Angeles, California at the time. We ended up leaving and moving to Tucson. I have some family here. I think in retrospect that my ex saw that my family has money, and so I think there was a sort of an intent there of sort of infiltrating my family and that kind of thing. The relationship quickly broke down after we moved here. You know, there were some red flags certainly early on in the relationship. I don't want to go too far into it, but she has a pretty sordid past as a sex worker and someone who had abused drugs extensively and alcohol. And, you know, in the process of our relationship, I helped her get sober. And, you know, she was a pretty reasonable and grounded person when she was sober, but when she used drugs or alcohol, she really, you know, sort of went off the rails. There was a DV incident in 2016. My daughter was only 8 months old. My ex was arrested and charged with domestic violence assault. You know, of course, years later when we went to trial, family court, she completely rewrote that story, and I was the perpetrator, even though she was arrested and pled guilty. So then she basically left me for her boss at a job that I helped her get here in Tucson, Arizona. I filed a paternity suit in 2017, and we've been in family court ever since. It's been nonstop. I mean, we typically are back in court every sort of 3, 5, 6 months over some issue, and it's just been an absolute nightmare, honestly. And so, as we were talking before we started, I started learning about cluster B types in probably about 5 years ago. And I really didn't know anything about NPD or BPD or sociopathy, antisocial behavior, or that kind of thing. And I started finding people on YouTube, you know, Sam Bachman, Richard Grannon, Elizabeth, I forget her name, Dr. Ramani, that kind of thing. And it just, the light bulb started going off, and I started seeing, the patterns of behavior that were just totally aligned with my ex. In the last 8 years with my daughter, she's had 2 failed relationships where she's very quickly moved in with these people with my daughter. In her last relationship, she had my daughter sleeping on the sofa for like 2 years. And of course, these people are not in her life anymore. She blames me for the failure of those relationships. So she basically lied in court under oath. She has a very sordid, what's insidious, I think is the word, lawyer who will just stop at nothing to, to manipulate the court. I've been mostly pro se litigant throughout the court proceedings. I did have a lawyer for about 2 years initially, but, after about $20,000 in lawyer's fees, I just decided that I couldn't do it anymore. And I had learned enough about the process, the civil process and all of that, and writing my own briefs where I felt more confident to represent myself, or to present myself rather. And it's been an interesting process because I've learned not only about family court, but just, learning about trust law and learning about civil procedure. It's really opened my eyes to a lot of things, relative to really, I would say, the unlawfulness of family court and the whole administrative court process, and how, these courts are really operating outside of the jurisdiction of the Constitution and civil rights. And it's an absolute travesty, honestly.
It absolutely is. So tell us a little bit about your relationship with your daughter when you were in the home.
So we have had an amazing relationship. When we moved here to Tucson, I had told my ex, I said, look, I want to spend time with my daughter, because when we were in LA, I was the sole provider and I was working like sun up, sun down, and to provide for our family. And so part of the idea of moving here was that I would get to spend more time with my daughter. And so when we got here, I was like, hey, I had saved money and I had paternity leave from California. And so I was like, hey, you're going to need to get a job. I'm going to stay home and do the dad thing, and she was very reluctant to that. So for the first 6 months, I was sort of in and out working a lot. And then I got to spend about 9 months like in the home with her solid. And that was a really beautiful time. And then when we split in 2017, we had 50-50. We set up 50-50 parenting time initially, agreed upon and then court ordered in 2018. So I actually had my daughter every weekend for the last, 8 years essentially. And I worked a part-time job so I could spend those 3 and 4 days a week with her. I took a financial hit for that, but for me, it was the sacrifice that was important to me because I just wanted to be with my daughter. And I relished those times with her, We go on camping trips. I have like an extra cycle, and so I'd pick her up on the bike from school and we'd ride home together, and just a lot of pool time and outside time and just hanging out at home time. We raised chickens a few years ago together. She has a pet corn snake. And, we garden together, we cook together. We just really spent a lot of quality time together.
Did you notice, up until the last year and a half, when you really just started to escalate, did you notice any changes in her over the course of this battle with her mother?
In sort of fashion of the true fashion of like this personality type, cluster B situation, there was a lot of red flags with my daughter early on. For example, she would come to me and she would have horrible diaper rash. Just horrible, like welts on her bottom. And I was able to clear it up literally within hours, typically. Little butt paste, little dryness, and like it would just clear, and just it was consistent, And then my daughter started reporting when she became verbal that her mom was spanking her on the face, is what she would say. And then in 2019, she reported that her mom's boyfriend, who I had very real concerns about early on, was sexually molesting her, was touching her vagina or her yoni, was the words that she used. And she was even interviewed in a forensic interview, and she disclosed this to the Tucson police, to the Department of Child Safety, and they did absolutely nothing. In fact, her mom alleged that I was coaching her to say these things, which is a complete lie. what initially made me concerned about it is, during diaper changes, she would get like super stiff, and she would get it, almost go into this catatonic type state, and I just didn't understand what was going on, and so I started asking her, like, what's happening, and that's when she disclosed to me. I didn't even find out what was disclosed in the interview because the DCS worker lied to me. After the interview, she said that she didn't say anything. And I have a audio recording of that. And then when I got the transcript of the interview, they had redacted that out. And it wasn't until I got the body camera of the police interviewing her mom where her mom disclosed what she said, and that was literally like 3 years after the fact. And so I'm actually in the process now of getting unredacted reports from the court, because she was interviewed a second time around the physical abuse from her mom, and they redacted the entire interview. They didn't let any of the information out. So, and then I also have police reports from the detective that was on the case where the boyfriend had sent them a video to the police of him actually coaching my daughter to not say anything during the interview. And the detective literally admonished him and said, hey, you need to be careful because it sounds like you're coaching her. And I mean, I presented that as evidence in the court, and the judge didn't do anything about it. So for me, the experience has just been an absolute nightmare. Dealing with the police, dealing with the Department of Child Safety, dealing with the courts. We're on our 7th judge now. And prior to the previous judge, I actually got the last judge who took away my parenting time. I got her to recuse for prejudice and bias. She actually just recused last year in the fall, in November. And so we have a commissioner assigned now. And so I'm in the process of, repetitioning to get my parenting time back.
So tell us a little bit about how it transitioned from you having her every weekend to no parenting time. What does that look like?
So basically what happened was in 2018, there was what was termed under Rule 68 as a binding agreement, right? That was in court. And so basically we had made a contract in court under order to have equal parenting time. And the times changed a little bit, but it was 50-50. There was a couple modifications just based on, kind of work schedule and that kind of thing. But otherwise it was 50-50. And then what happened is in 2020, she had me arrested for violating the court orders that we only send three text messages a day. And she baited me into sending a fourth message where she tried to change the court-ordered exchange location, like literally an hour before I was supposed to pick up my daughter, which we were doing it at the police station. And she said, oh, I'll see you at the park. And I responded to her saying, I'll see you at the police station. She had me arrested at the police station for sending a fourth text message.
Oh my gosh.
So I was actually convicted of a misdemeanor for IJP, interfering with judicial proceedings, for sending one single text message. And the lower court and the upper court both agreed it wasn't the content of the message. It was just the sending of the message that I was guilty of, right? So then the following year, she had me arrested again for what the court was calling aggravated harassment, right? Basically saying that she felt harassed by the text messages through the Co-Parenter app, right? Meanwhile, there was no profanity, there was no name calling, there were no allegations, made in the text messages, but she said she felt harassed, right? So I was arrested for that. It went through about 1.5 years of court process, and eventually the grand jury dismissed all the charges for no probable cause. But in that process, we had what was basically a truncated trial where we had a previous judge who had some hearings, but it wasn't a trial. And then the court was reassigned. That judge recused because his clerk's daughter went to school with my daughter. That's how kind of small Tucson can be, which I didn't really think was grounds for recusal, but it was clear he wanted to kind of wash his hands of this case. So we got a newly assigned judge. It was a Doug Ducey appointee. I'll say no more about that. And she came in hot and heavy, and it was clear that she had already made up her mind about me and about where she was going with this case. So she truncated the trial and she combined like 3 hearings into a 4-day trial as part of the trial, which it wasn't. And through that process, basically just drug me over the coals, and then took away all my parenting time. Meanwhile, I had 3 therapists over the last 10 years testify. I put DCS on the case, I put Tucson police on the stand. I had a police officer testify twice stating that my daughter had told the police and DCS that her mom had hit her in the face. I had a nurse practitioner testify of bruising on her legs. I had photographs, I had video recordings, and I mean, it's just mind-blowing that the court ruled in the way it did. And so basically the whole case was pinned on her allegations against me, which were unproven because they were under adjudication at the time, so they hadn't been proven. And then sort of retelling of the story of when she was arrested for domestic violence assault. And so the court ruled that there was significant domestic violence in the case, and that was really the grounds for taking away my parents' time. Also, her boyfriend at the time paid for her lawyer and also paid for a second psych evaluation of me. She's never done a psych evaluation. I've done the whole battery of testing twice. There has never been any personality disorders whatsoever determined by any testing. But she paid this woman, her name is Dr. Pellegrin, actually. If anyone has a case with her, please run. You can look her up online. She has terrible reviews. Her boyfriend paid her $5,000 basically to say that I have narcissistic traits and obsessive compulsive traits. And when I asked her, I put her on the stand, of course, and when I asked her, I said, well, there's 9 traits, which ones do I have? And she said, well, you clearly have no empathy for your ex. And I was like, why would I? This person has made my life a living hell, and wants to take my child from me. So where do I find the compassion for this person? I mean, Charity, it's just been an absolute nightmare.
Let's talk about the time since you haven't had her and what that's been like for you. And I know you've put a lot into this, and today's an important day, and I'm sure it's heartbreaking.
Yeah, so go ahead, sorry.
No, go ahead.
So, I realized a couple years ago that I started having symptoms of PTSD. I started having nightmares. I started not being able to sleep. Every time there's a knock on the door, I don't know if it's the police, if it's DCS, that kind of thing. And so I started realizing that I was developing this kind of hypervigilance, and through my research around, parents that are alienated, I realized that this is all sort of part and parcel, of the experience. And so, I got back into therapy, and I've recently found a really great therapist. I've had a couple over the last couple years, and they've all confirmed that I certainly have PTSD. I certainly have generalized anxiety disorder from the experience. I certainly have depression. But I will say I think I have great coping skills. So what I've learned through this process is you really have to focus on your physical and mental health. And so I work out regularly almost every day. I've developed a really strong meditation practice. I do yoga. I go outside a lot. I hike. I had to learn to take off from focusing so much on the family court case and sort of doing so much research and really starting to break up my time. My therapist helped me work on setting timers almost, and literally saying, okay, I'm going to work on this for 2 hours or 3 hours, and then I'm going to let it go for the day. Because I was staying up, late at night, writing briefs and pleadings and that kind of thing. But it's just been really, really difficult. Fortunately, I have a pretty strong community here in town. I've actually met a lot of people through the work that I have done with Parental as a parent support facilitator and educator. I've hosted a weekly dads group. So recently I also volunteered with Southern Arizona Child Advocacy Center with a book club. I did it as a participant, and then the facilitator asked me to be a parent partner facilitator with the book, What Happened to You? It's the Dr. Bruce, I'm blanking on his last name now. It's a Oprah Winfrey kind of interview with him and put in a book form. And he talks about post-traumatic wisdom, turning post-traumatic stress into post-traumatic wisdom. And so I've really tried to focus on transforming this experience into something positive and something about support for the community of alienated parents, because I just, I refuse to let this, take me down.
So do you speak to your daughter at all? Do you FaceTime? Do you have phone conversations?
No, I have no contact with her at all. I was doing, I'm court ordered to do parent supervised visitation, for the last year and a half. I was doing supervised visitation with her for a year. We've gone through 2 agencies, the first agency I felt was really biased, and the owner of the agency was the one doing the visitations, and it was up to her to like cancel a visit if she decided. And I felt like there was a real ethical conflict of interest there. And she had canceled a visit on me one time when I asked her for the mailing address for her business, because I was going to subpoena her. And I very calmly said, hey, would you mind writing your business? And I'd already asked her like multiple times on an email, and she refused to give it to me. And then she canceled the visit. And so I petitioned the court. I said, hey, we're not using this agency anymore. They assigned us to another agency. And then last summer was when, coincidentally, because, in Arizona, you have to wait a year to re-petition for modification of parenting time after there's an order. And so I waited that year, and coincidentally, when that year came up, all of a sudden my daughter didn't want to see me anymore. And my ex was telling this agency that my daughter was refusing to come to the visits. And so after about 6 weeks of that, they just said, we're not going to do visits anymore. And so I've been trying to get a new agency assigned. The new judge, or the commissioner that's assigned to the case, ordered therapeutic counseling for my daughter and I. That was supposed to start a month ago. The agency closed, they shuttered. And that's been a real issue here in Arizona, in Tucson, because a lot of these agencies, are underfunded and they can't keep up with the costs. And so there's just a handful of them that are available. So right now I've got a hearing in May, a status conference hearing, and to kind of see where we go forward. Her lawyer, of course, has filed a brief that is full of lies, again, alleging that it's my fault that this agency closed, or that, that they don't want to work with us anymore somehow, even though it has nothing to do with me. I didn't even know, actually, until after she filed the brief. And then I called them and said, hey, and there was an outgoing message that said that they closed for business. So right now the status is that I'm preparing a new petition. I've got a hearing in May. I'll share this real briefly. So my daughter's been in therapy with a local organization, Caseos, and I had a meeting with them, and I said, hey, could I participate in child family teams, right? CFTs. Well, they proposed the idea initially. I asked, my ex, and she refused, of course. And then I petitioned the court, and I asked for a motion to show cause, why are you refusing, kind of thing. So we're waiting on a hearing about that, just for me to just participate in a child family team meeting with her therapist, because she's now lying to the therapist, saying all these things about me, and then of course controlling the narrative by triangulating and isolating my daughter and I, so we can't talk. So I have no contact with my daughter at all, and of course that's the way I think that she wants it.
So did you get any updates from family, friends, how she's doing?
Nope, I don't hear anything. Through the process, my ex has triangulated my family as well. I used to have a great relationship with my sister. We haven't spoken in the last 2 years. I had never had a great relationship with my mom. I've tried to reconcile many, many times. Unfortunately, my mom is bipolar, and so they're kind of like, how would you say? They're very similar in their sort of approach, and they have a very symbiotic relationship, because now my ex controls access to my daughter, right? And so she actually extorted money out of them, my mother and her husband, to pay her lawyer's fees for about 5 years, to the tune of over $50,000. Oh yeah, yeah. And it was all kind of under the guise of, if you want to see your granddaughter, then you're going to have to pay my lawyer's fees. She, as far as I know, she's never paid any lawyer's fees. She alleged after my family eventually cut her off. And then, although, she still has, they still, communicate. And, of course she needs them to babysit my daughter when she goes out of town with her new boyfriend. But she got her last boyfriend to take out a $30,000 second mortgage on his house to pay for her lawyer's fees, and then left him. And so he's
Oh
on the
my
hook for
gosh.
that. No, I mean, it's insidious. This is the most, and trying to explain that to the court is very difficult. But she testified under oath, of course, that we took out a loan. But I've asked multiple times for the loan documents. Of course they're not forthcoming because I'm sure her name isn't anywhere on that.
So let's talk about the corrupt court system. I'm sure you have a few things to say about that. But before we talk about that, I want to talk about her behavior in the courtroom. What was that like? Because with this personality type, you find that they present so poised and controlled and calm. Let's talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, it's kind of ebbed and flowed, but she typically will cry almost every time that she goes on the stand. There's a lot of huffing and puffing, there's a lot of gestures and facial expression type thing to the judge. If I say something that she disputes, it's very performative. Performative, I think, is the word, really. But she'll almost always cry on the stand and beg, kind of thing. And I will say she's gotten more poised, and she's changed her demeanor, and she dresses more professionally now, and that kind of thing. So clearly she's been, coached by her lawyer. But she has no stops as far as lying under oath and, just presenting herself as this perfect mom who's just trying to do her best, and I'm the problem. I'm always the problem. Even though I put the detective on the stand who put in her report that, she found 4 times as many court-ordered violations against her than she did for me, all this stuff just goes over the court's head in a sense. I will say that the previous judges, and I mean, I'll just call it out, Judge Constant here, Danielle Constant was the one that took away my parenting time. Prior to that, we had 5 judges, and none of those judges had taken away my parenting time, had taken away my parental rights or anything. So, I think there is prejudice, certainly. There is bias. I think that, here in Pima County, I think it is really focused on, like they call it, mother state often is different, different states. I think all of them are really. But I fought really hard to protect my access to my child. It was really particularly this one judge that I think truly overreacted. I will say our initial judge, though, he wasn't great either. I think they're all very prejudiced and very biased. And there's always a rush to judgment, So it's just, as you've probably experienced as well, I think the corruption is part of the system. And it also has a lot to do with the lawyers, the family court lawyers in the cases, because I think, these lawyers, it's a $50 billion industry, and these lawyers ratchet up conflict because that's dollars in the bank for them. And so this lawyer in particular, Erin Fox, that she has a reputation in town. I've met with multiple lawyers, and they all sort of feel the same way about her firm. There's 2 people at her firm, and I think it's just a corrupt system, and they all know each other. They all hang out together. And I think a lot of these deals and decisions are done sort of behind closed doors and a nod and a wink and that kind of thing.
Favors, I'll do this for you if you do that for me. And I have this case has this or this case has that. And yeah, it's
and her lawyer's currently acting as a pro temp judge. And I feel like that's in itself a conflict of interest.
Yeah.
I don't see why someone who's acting as a pro tempore can still represent people, that fundamentally seems like a conflict of interest. It's like, which side of the court are you on here? I think that judges and lawyers should be I think they should lose their qualified immunity under 42 USC 1983, which is, conspiracy to violate rights, which, police officers can be sued under. I think both lawyers and judges should be able to be sued under that code, frankly.
Yeah, it's the immunity that lets them do whatever they want, and prosecutors
Yeah,
as well.
yeah, absolutely. And I really think that needs to go away because I
Mhm.
think the abuse of authority and the abuse of discretion is just rampant, especially in the family court. Here in Arizona, the family court was literally created out of thin air in 1984. So it's 30 years old. 40, 50 years old. I mean, that just blows my mind. And I mean, I literally asked judges, is this an Article 1 or Article 3 court? And they refuse to answer those questions, of course, because they know that this is outside of the jurisdiction of the
Right.
Constitution. And again, it's a travesty, because it's a violation of our civil due process rights.
And they have so much power, and their word is gold. If they say it, it stands, and any deviation from that lands you in jail.
It's true. This last judge kept referring to Backstrand v. Backstrand here in Arizona. And basically, this case, supposedly, what she claims was that it gave absolute discretion to the judges, which I disagree completely. This case it was a relocation case wherein the mom had taken the child from Arizona to Nevada. And the dad actually was living in Michigan at the time, and they were doing, shared parenting where I think the child was spending summers, with him and then going to school here in Arizona. Well, she just left to go to Las Vegas, and the father petitioned, and he ended up getting custody of the children because she left the state without notification. And for some reason, this judge specifically, is using that case as an absolute discretionary tool, which I was just like flabbergasted. Like, how is it possible that you think that this one case gives you total discretion? Because I mean, I personally disagree. Had I known, because I took my case initially to appeal, and here's the thing about that judge, and I know we're running out of time, so I'll wrap it up. But I asked, so she sealed the court record, right? And then I had a stipulated motion from my ex's lawyer and myself to unseal the documents so I could access the testimony of the trial,
Yeah.
so I could reference it in my appeal. And the judge denied a
Yeah.
stipulated motion between the parties because she knew
Hmm.
that I was going to expose her in the appeal.
Yes.
So I lost my appeal because I couldn't access the court records, right? And so now, the current judge is saying, the commissioner is saying, well, you lost your appeal. You had your chance. Had I known then more about due process and that, I would have taken it to the Supreme Court, because I think I probably could have at least got the court to unseal the documents.
Yeah.
But then I also had to sort of pick my battles in a sense because, do I take it to the Supreme Court and wait another 6 months or a year to see my child? Or do I let it go back to the lower court and keep fighting there, because I might get access to my daughter sooner there than waiting for a Supreme Court decision? So, you have to kind of weigh you have to pick your battles and figure out, do I want to win this battle and get to see my child, or do I want to win the war, and
Mhm.
somehow change law and change precedent? And so it's so difficult to wrap your head around and to come to terms with it. And it's just crazy making, frankly.
It's it's really discouraging as you hear these stories in family court, because it is like the wild, wild west, but it's the same in criminal courts too. There's no judicial accountability across any of the branches of the judicial courts, none. And they can steal documents, they can interfere with your ability to have a successful case and an incredibly successful outcome. It's a money laundering business, is what it is.
100%. I mean, when it comes down to it, all criminal cases are civil in nature. It's
Mhm.
all commerce, frankly.
Yeah.
And that's something that I've learned through what I would consider becoming an attorney. In fact, studying the law over the last 8, 9 years is, really understanding the Constitution and civil due process, and the fact that they take out bid bonds on all these cases, and they're financing these cases effectively through insurance policies, through bonds. And that's what it's about. It's about commerce. It's not about crime. again, Article 1, Article 3, and if it's a criminal procedure, then there has to be a verified complaint signed by a victim, right? And if there isn't, then where's the crime? So if they're civil in nature, then it's fundamentally about money. So anyone out there, I would really encourage them to learn about civilian due process and equitable rights and how these courts are operating. Because for example, when you take a lawyer on, you actually give up your rights. A lot of people don't realize that because they're officers of the court, and their first, as you know, is their first priority allegiance is to the court, not to you. And a lot of people don't realize that.
Yeah, in our case, he was very clear that I can make decisions on your behalf without your
Because
input.
you're a ward of the court.
Yeah.
And this is where people talk about correcting your status and literally changing your name to your uppercase, lowercase name, and, separating yourself from the ens legis, the artificial dead entity, your corporate entity that they created for you when you were born. A lot of people don't realize that, they're putting us in their jurisdiction by creating a corporate name with our name, and that we have to separate ourselves and declare ourselves as ultimately state nationals, as opposed to U.S. citizens with a lowercase c, 14th Amendment citizens, which make us debt slaves to the national debt. And a lot of people just don't understand how that happened through Banking Act of 1933, through House Joint Resolution 192. We as Americans need to educate ourselves and understand that we have been bamboozled, as debt slaves. And we ultimately need to understand that it's not our debt. It's the U.S. government corporation's debt.
And in family court, there's no best interest of the child.
No. And that's really sad. I don't know if you're aware of this, but Arizona just passed, the House just voted unanimously on a bill, and I don't know the number of it. It's a House bill, but they're basically saying that it's in the best interest of the child now to be with the parent that they've been with most. Basically that they're most bonded to, right? So here in Arizona, it looks like, in fact, one of the things I'm going to be doing this week is calling around and finding out and talking to representatives about what's going on with this bill, because it's going to the Senate now, apparently. And, this is part of the whole corruption where now if you can isolate your child and get them away from the other parent, okay, now you're the protective parent. Now you have the biggest bond with the child, even though you're an alienator, and so now it's in the best interest of the child to be with you all the time. And that just blows my mind, even though Title 25 in Arizona says specifically that it's in the best interest to have 50-50 parenting time. Now they're trying to throw that out, baby out with the bathwater, so to speak.
Final thoughts for our listeners.
I think we need to organize as parents, as alienated parents. I think shows like this are fundamental. And thank you, Charity, for all the work you do and all the social media posts that you do, exposing and educating this horrible phenomenon, and what I would call, and I think lawyers that I've spoke to have called it an epidemic in this country.
Yeah.
I think we need to organize. We need to keep talking. We need to call our representatives. We need to, sign petitions, and we need to get vocal about it as much as possible. And we need to create reform in the court, in the family court, at the grassroots level. And so thank you, Charity, for all the work that you're doing. Thank you for having me on your show and having an opportunity to be heard and to discuss these ideas. And, thank you so much for the work you're doing.
Of course. Thank you, Sean, and thank you for joining the Fractured Families podcast.
My pleasure. Thank you, Charity.
Thank you for joining me on this episode of the Fractured Families podcast. I hope our conversation has provided you with support, understanding, and actionable insights to help you navigate your own family challenges. Remember, healing is a journey, and reaching out for help is a sign of strength. You're not alone. If you found value in today's episode, please subscribe, rate, and leave a review. Your support helps us reach more families in need. You can contact me on social media at Parental Alienation is Real, and visit our website for additional resources and ways to get involved. Stay strong, stay connected, and keep fighting for the family bonds that matter most. Until next time, take care and stay resilient.